I've spent much of my adult life thinking about why certain countries develop. So it's so fun to be back here in Costa Rica, a country I first visited 20 years ago when it was a very different place. At Northwestern University, I teach economics and public policy. But today I want to have a conversation at the intersection of the two. I want to talk about development. And development is a path, but not a set of directions. It is a cuisine, but not a recipe. Development is not what happened in America after World War II, or what happened in Japan a generation later, but it includes these things. Costa Rica has a story to tell here, and one of the things we'll learn today is that different countries have different stories. The differences between these stories are important, perhaps as important as the similarities. Most people on Earth have something in common. The majority of us live in middle-income countries. This includes Chinese and Indians and Costa Ricans. Costa Rica graduated from aid in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It became an upper middle-income country in 2007. Some economists, including me, believe Costa Rica is on track to become a high-income country in the next generation, the generation of Costa Rican development that your children will design, share, and lead. But let's think about other places in the world. Let's look outside Europe, but think about countries that became upper middle income after 1950, as Costa Rica did, but went on to become high income. By the World Bank's count, there are only 9. These 5 are in Asia. We see that these countries have very different timelines of development. They do not have one synchronized story. When we look beyond Asia and Europe, we see 4 more countries and 4 very different stories. Argentina remained an upper middle income country for 40 years before becoming a high income country. Chile began this same journey later, but completed it sooner. Israel experienced remarkable growth in the 1970s and 1980s. It was already a high-income country by the time Mauritius went from being lower middle to upper middle income. What, however, do these countries have in common? What can we observe? We notice that not one of these 9 countries developed because of the kinds of aid we normally think of when we think of economic development aid. They didn't receive or grow or do the things that we think might happen in a developing country. Mauritius didn't develop because it had more mosquito nets than other African countries. Argentina and Chile, they didn't grow because they had more closely scrutinized elections than Brazil or Peru. Ha-Joon Chang, the professor at Cambridge, often uses this analogy of development as a ladder. I think this is a helpful analogy, but only if we recognize that different countries climb different ladders. A few years ago, I lived in a small village in northern Uganda. I was doing the final fieldwork for my PhD. In this village, there was lots of aid. In fact, there was some development agency willing to help a local person do almost anything. There was free healthcare clinics and free tractor repair. People could just ask around, and nearly anything, there was someone to help, usually free. On the outskirts of this village, I met a farmer, and this farmer told me that his daughter wanted to be a doctor, but he said he would discourage this, and I asked why. He said, suppose my daughter, who's now 9, goes off to a selective secondary school in the city in Kampala. Suppose she goes on and goes to university in England, maybe even gets into an American medical school. Of course we would be proud of her. But if she comes back to our village, she will be a peasant. Look around you at these white aid workers, he said. Look at these people. They are fine, able, caring doctors. They ask for no payment in exchange for their services. How could my daughter compete with these people, even if she is the finest physician in the world? It took this conversation for me to realize the selfishness of our traditional aid, the folly of our philanthropy. Too often we have allowed the effects of our programs to frustrate entrepreneurs, to stop people from being engineers and doctors. But what does a place like Uganda have to do with these wealthy places that we spoke about a moment ago? What could Uganda and Hong Kong possibly have in common? Uganda and Hong Kong aren't so far apart. They're separated by 9,000 kilometers, but only 2 generations. My grandmother grew up in Hong Kong in the 1930s, and it was a hopeful place. It was very much like Kampala, Uganda's capital is today. But it was frustrated. It was trying to grow, but it was saddled with health, social, infrastructure problems, along with the colonial debt arrangements imposed by the British. But people saw that growth was possible. People believed that in 1 or 2 generations, things could change. This is a photograph taken a few years ago in the capital of Uganda, Kampala. And this is a photograph taken in Hong Kong when my grandmother was a small girl. This is the same Hong Kong tramway line today. This development was not the result of paternalistic foreign aid intervention. It was not the result of sending free goods and services and doctors to Hong Kong. Now, I'm not saying that history can tell us which emerging markets will emerge next. But there are lessons we can learn from history. And when we look at this history, the history of emerging markets over the last 100 years, what we see is diversity. We see that it is this diversity and these homegrown solutions that have helped cushion the emerging markets from the shocks that developed countries have historically experienced. We see this when we look at real gross domestic product growth in 2007. We look at this map that represents the very beginning of the Great Recession. And we see the persistence and resilience of growth in emerging markets. Now, we have learned another lesson. We have learned that development will not wait for anyone, and it will certainly not wait for anyone to catch up. If you were to start an automobile company in Costa Rica today, it would have to compete with companies that have been manufacturing cars for decades. It would be difficult, but it is possible. This is the interior of the Toyota Crown, the company's flagship model, in the year Japan went from being a lower middle-income country to being an upper middle-income country. The same transition Costa Rica experienced in 2007. This is what drivers of the Toyota Celsior saw, Toyota's top model in the year Japan became a high-income country. And this is the view from the driver's seat of Toyota's top model today. Unquestionably one of the finest vehicles in the world. Development looks different in different places and at different times. Not every rebuilding calls for a Marshall Plan. Not every damaged place is a Dresden. Not every macroeconomic adjustment is a Chile. We have learned this. Development is a path that must be discovered. It is not a product that can be bought or a gift that can be given. I wish everyone here, particularly our Costa Rican hosts, great success in finding new paths and new answers.